The Great Hall of the Galactic Council stretched across 3 kilometers of polished crystal, its dome reaching toward the stars of the Andromeda sector. Representatives from 47 species sat in their designated sections, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of clicks, whistles, telepathic hums, and translated speech that filled the vast space. Ambassador HFY of the crystalline hegemony raised one of her 4 translucent arms, causing the chamber to fall silent. The light from the nearby binary stars filtered through her silicon-based body, casting rainbow patterns across the assembly floor. "Fellow counselors," she began, her voice carried through quantum resonance, "we face the gravest threat our galaxy has known in 10,000 cycles." The holographic display above the center of the hall flickered to life, showing a 3-dimensional map of the Outer Rim territories. Red indicators spread like a disease across dozens of star systems, each one representing a world consumed by the Devourers. These ancient machines had awakened from some forgotten corner of dark space, and wherever they passed, they left nothing but empty husks of planets, stripped of all organic matter and most metals. "The Devourer swarm has consumed the Tellurian colonies," continued Ambassador HFY. 40 billion souls gone. The Aquatic Federation's homeworld fell yesterday. The Hive Queens report that even their warrior breeds cannot slow the advance. Councillor Grexmore, a hulking representative of the Stone Giants, slammed one massive fist against his speaking podium. The sound echoed like thunder through the hall. "Our combined fleets have failed," he rumbled, his voice like grinding boulders. "The Devourers adapt to our weapons faster than we could develop new ones. Energy shields mean nothing to them. Kinetic barriers are dissolved in seconds. Even our most powerful plasma cannons barely scratch their hulls." A chittering sound arose from the insectoid section as Representative Click-Tack of the Swarm Collective spoke. "The mathematics are clear," she said through her translator. "At their current rate of expansion, the Devourers will reach the core worlds within 6 cycles. Our projections show a 97% probability of total galactic extinction." The hall erupted in various forms of distress. The gas beings in their containment suits flickered with agitated colors. The plant folks' leaves rustled in waves of anxiety. Even the normally stoic Machine Confederation's robots showed signs of computational stress through rapid LED flashing. Ambassador HFY called for order, but it took several minutes for the panic to subside. When relative quiet returned, she continued with what sounded like resignation. "We have exhausted our conventional options. The Science Directorate reports that developing effective countermeasures would take decades we do not have. Our military strategists see no path to victory with current resources." "Then, we are doomed," wheezed Ambassador Fluxnara of the Gas Dancer Collective, her containment suit's speakers crackling with static. "Perhaps not," came a new voice from the observation deck. Every head, sensor array, and optical device in the hall turned toward the source. In the visitors' gallery sat a figure that most of the council members had never seen in person, though all knew of humanity by reputation. The human was unremarkable by the standards of the galaxy's more exotic species, bipedal, carbon-based, wearing simple dark clothing. But there was something in the way he carried himself that commanded attention. General Marcus Chun, retired from the Terran Defense Force, stood slowly. His hair had gone gray during his 40 years of service, and scars marked his weathered face from battles fought in humanity's expansion to the stars. He had requested permission to address the council 3 days ago, but most representatives assumed it was merely a courtesy gesture from a minor species. "Honorable counselors," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the translation systems, "I represent the Human Military Veterans Association. We would like to offer our assistance." The reaction was immediate and predictable. Laughter, if it could be called that, erupted from several sections. The avian hierarchy's representatives squawked in what their translators rendered as amusement. The Silicon Lord's crystals chimed in harmonic mockery. Councillor Grexmore's laugh was like an avalanche. "Humans? You have been spacefaring for less than 2 centuries. Your species has exactly 12 inhabited worlds, and perhaps 50 million soldiers across your entire military. The Devourers have consumed civilizations older than your entire planet. Your technology is millennia behind the Council standards," added Representative Click-Tack, her mandibles clicking dismissively. Your weapons still rely primarily on kinetic projectiles and chemical explosives. Your ships lack even basic energy shielding. Ambassador HFY raised a hand for silence, though her body language suggested she shared the skepticism. General Chun, we appreciate humanity's willingness to help in these dark times. However, the Devourers have overwhelmed forces far more advanced than yours. The techno-supremacist Union deployed weapons that could crack moons, and they lasted less than an hour. The Psychic Dominion tried to simply think the Devourers out of existence, and they were consumed like all the rest. General Chun remained standing, unmoved by the dismissal. With respect, counselors, you misunderstand what we're offering. We're not proposing to send our regular military. We're talking about sending our veterans. The distinction seemed lost on most of the assembly. To beings who lived for thousands of years or existed as hive minds or uploaded consciousnesses, the difference between a young soldier and an old one was negligible. General, Ambassador HFY said with what passed for patience among her species, I fail to see how age would improve your chances against an enemy that has defeated our best warriors. Then, you don't understand humans, replied General Chen simply. You see, counselors, there's something unique about human veterans. We don't just fight for duty or programming or species survival. We fight because we've learned how to turn trauma into fuel, fear into focus, and loss into absolute determination. He gestured toward the holographic display of the spreading devourer swarm. Every one of my people has lost someone to war. Every veteran carries scars that go deeper than flesh. We've seen friends die, civilizations fall, and hope disappear. And we kept fighting anyway. Not because we thought we could win, but because giving up was worse than dying. The hall had grown quiet. Something in the human's voice had cut through the ambient dismissal. You want to know what makes human veterans different? General Chun continued. We specialize in impossible situations. We've never faced an enemy we couldn't find a way to hurt. We've turned defeats into victories so many times that our military academies teach entire courses on human unpredictability as a tactical doctrine. Representative Click-Tack's compound eyes glittered. Boastful words from a species that has never faced extinction. Haven't we? General Chen's smile was cold. In our short history, we've survived ice ages, plagues, asteroid impacts, nuclear wars, and ecological collapse. We fought wars where both sides had enough weapons to sterilize our planet, and somehow we're still here. We've taken our worst instincts, aggression, stubbornness, the refusal to accept defeat, and we've weaponized them. He paused, letting his words sink in. You say the Devourers adapt to your weapons? Good. We specialize in enemies that adapt. You say they're too numerous? We've won battles where we were outnumbered 1,000 to 1. You say they show no mercy? Neither do we, when our backs are against the wall. Counselor Grexmore leaned forward, his massive form casting shadows across the speaking floor. Even if we accepted your proposal, human, how many veterans could you possibly send? A few thousand? A few million at most. 700 million, General Chun replied without hesitation. The number hit the assembly like a physical blow. Several representatives checked their translation systems, certain they had heard incorrectly. 700 million veterans? Ambassador HFY's crystalline form seemed to dim. That's more than the total military strength of most member species. Human life is short compared to most of yours, General Chen explained. We've been fighting somewhere in our territory for the past 8 decades straight. Border disputes, colonial rebellions, pirate suppression, exploration missions gone wrong. Every human colony has produced its share of veterans, and we don't just count soldiers. We count pilots, engineers, medics, logistics specialists, intelligence operatives, and support personnel. Anyone who's seen combat or serve in a war zone. He gestured to include the entire assembly. And here's something else you should know about human veterans. We don't fight as individuals. We form bonds forged in shared trauma and tested under fire. We call them battle families, and they're stronger than any military hierarchy you've ever seen. Numbers alone will not defeat the Devourers, protested Ambassador Fluxnara. They have consumed countless billions. You're right, General Chen agreed. Numbers won't be enough. But we're not just offering numbers. We're offering something your civilizations seem to have lost: the willingness to do whatever it takes to win. The implications of those words sent ripples through the assembly. Advanced civilizations prided themselves on their ethical codes, their sophisticated rules of engagement, their commitment to minimizing casualties and preserving infrastructure. You speak of barbarism, observed Representative Click-Tack. I speak of survival, General Chen corrected. When the Devourers reach the core worlds, your ethics won't matter. Your sophisticated weapons won't matter. Your 1,000-year-old military traditions won't matter. The only thing that will matter is whether you're willing to fight dirty enough to win. Ambassador Hextera's light patterns shifted to deep blues and purples, colors associated with deep thought among her people. What exactly are you proposing, General? Give us ships. Give us supplies. Give us the intelligence you have on Devourer capabilities and tactics. Then stay out of our way and let us do what humans do best. Find a way to kill things that everyone says can't be killed. The hall erupted again, but this time the sound were different. Not mockery or panic, but intense discussion and debate. The idea was audacious, possibly insane, but it was the first proposal that offered any hope. General Chun waited for the noise to die down before delivering his final statement. Counselors, you can doubt our technology. You can question our experience. You can dismiss our capabilities. But understand this: human veterans have never met an enemy they couldn't find a way to defeat, given enough motivation. His eyes swept across the assembly, meeting the gazes of beings whose species had ruled the galaxy for millennia. And right now, counselors, we have all the motivation we need. Because if the Devourers reach human space, they won't just be killing strangers. They'll be killing our families, our children, our future. And that, counselors, is something we simply will not allow. The silence that followed was profound. For the first time since the Devourer crisis began, the Galactic Council was considering not just how to delay defeat, but how to achieve victory. And that possibility rested in the hands of species most of them had barely noticed until now. 3 weeks after the council session, General Chun stood on the observation deck of the massive orbital shipyard above Kepler, 442b, watching the largest military mobilization in human history take shape. The sight would have been incomprehensible to the galactic representatives who had initially dismissed his offer. Ships of every conceivable design filled the space around the shipyard. Converted cargo haulers bristled with hastily mounted weapons. Retired military vessels pulled from museum duty had been retrofitted with modern systems. Commercial passenger liners had been transformed into troop transports. Even civilian pleasure craft had been modified to serve as reconnaissance and communication relays. General, the final transport group has arrived, announced Colonel Sarah Martinez, Chin's former aide-de-camp who had volunteered to help coordinate the operation. She gestured toward a collection of vessels that defied easy categorization. That's the Australian contingent. They've somehow managed to mount mining lasers on their ships, and they're calling them prospector frigates. Chun smiled, recognizing the ingenuity that had always characterized human warfare. How many do we have total now? 732 million volunteers across all specialties, Martinez replied, consulting her tablet. The response exceeded even our most optimistic projections. We had to turn away another 200 million who wanted to help. The numbers were staggering, but what impressed Chun even more was the speed of the response. Within hours of the news feeds broadcasting his proposal to the Galactic Council, retired soldiers from across human space had begun volunteering. They came from every world, every branch of service, every conflict humanity had fought since reaching the stars. "Sir, we're getting reports from the integration teams," said Commander James Wright, the operations chief of staff. "The galactic technology transfers are proceeding ahead of schedule. Apparently, our primitive engineering philosophy is making the upgrades easier than expected." Shin nodded. The Galactic Council had been true to their word, providing access to advanced technologies in exchange for humanity's commitment to the fight. What they hadn't anticipated was how readily human engineers would adapt, modify, and improve upon alien designs. "Show me the weapon system status," Chin ordered. A holographic display materialized, showing ship after ship being fitted with energy weapons, improved armor, and shield generators. But Scattered among the alien technology were distinctly human additions that made the galactic observers scratch their heads in confusion. The engineering teams are having a field day, Wright explained. Sergeant Morrison's group figured out how to mount kinetic kill vehicles alongside the energy weapons. They're calling them sledgehammers. The idea is that while the Devourers are adapting to our energy output, we hit them with a chunk of tungsten moving at a significant fraction of light speed. And the Koreans? They've developed what they're calling friendship missiles, conventional warheads packed with metallic hydrogen that are designed to get as close as possible before detonating. The theory is that the Devourers won't see them as threats until it's too late because they're not energy-based. Chun studied the reports flowing in from a dozen different engineering teams. Each group was approaching the problem from a different angle, applying lessons learned from conflict the galactic powers had never even heard of. The diversity of solutions was exactly what he had hoped for. General Chun? The voice came from behind him, carrying the subtle harmonic undertones that identify the speaker as one of the crystalline hegemony's representatives. Chun turned to see Ambassador Silmara Ustaraz aide, approaching with what could only be described as nervous energy. Her crystalline form shifted through rapid color changes, indicating high stress levels. Ambassador, Chun acknowledged. What can I do for you? I've been observing your preparations, she said, her translated voice carrying undertones of amazement. I must admit, the scale and speed of your mobilization is unprecedented. But I have concerns about your tactical approach. Chun gestured for her to continue. Your forces lack unified command structure, Silmara explained. I observed dozens of separate groups, each following different tactical doctrines. The Galactic Council's military advisors suggest this will lead to chaos when you encounter the Devourers. The chaos is intentional, Chun replied calmly. Unified command structures create predictable patterns. The Devourers have defeated every organized military they've encountered because organized militaries fight in predictable ways. He pointed toward a group of ships being fitted with what appeared to be civilian mining equipment. That's a group of former asteroid miners led by a woman who spent 30 years fighting claim jumpers in the belt. They think like miners, not soldiers. They're planning to treat Devourer ships like particularly difficult asteroids that need to be broken up efficiently. Silmara's form flickered with confusion colors. But surely coordination is essential for military effectiveness? For traditional military actions, yes, Chun agreed. But this isn't traditional warfare. The Devourers expect coordinated responses because that's how every galactic military operates. They've learned to counter unified tactics. What they haven't encountered is managed chaos. He gestured toward another section where a group of former Special Forces operators was working alongside civilian engineers. Every group has complete tactical autonomy. They'll coordinate when it makes sense, but each unit is free to engage the enemy however they think best. The Devourers won't be able to predict our responses because we won't be following any single doctrine. But what about logistics? Supply lines? Command and control? We've simplified all of that, Wright interjected. Every ship group is self-sufficient for at least 6 months. Every unit has direct communication access to intelligence feeds. No unit is dependent on any other unit for mission-critical functions. Chun watched Silmara process this information. The concept of military units operating without centralized control was alien to species that had spent millennia perfecting hierarchical command structures. There's something else, Chun added. Human veterans don't just bring tactical experience. They bring emotional intelligence that your species might not fully understand. Emotional intelligence. Silmara's colors shifted to curiosity patterns. Every human veteran has personal reasons for being here, Chun explained. They've all lost people they care about to war. They've all seen the cost of failure. When they fight the Devourers, it won't be abstract. It will be personal. He pulled up personnel files on the display. Take Commander Lisa Park. She lost her entire unit to pirates when she was 25. Spent the next 15 years hunting down every pirate organization in the Tau Ceti sector. Or Sergeant Major David Thompson. His homeworld was evacuated during the Centauri Colonial War. He spent his retirement organizing disaster relief efforts. Every one of these veterans has something to prove, someone to avenge, or something to protect, Martinez added. That's not just motivation. That's fuel for innovation. When you're fighting for personal reasons, you don't accept limitations. Silmara's form had stabilized into deep blue contemplation colors. Your species approaches warfare very differently than we anticipated. Because we approach everything differently, Chen replied. You see chaos where we see flexibility. You see disorder where we see adaptation. You see primitiveness where we see efficiency. A new voice joined the conversation as Captain Elena Vasquez approached from the communications center. General, we're getting reports from the forward reconnaissance groups. They've reached the outer edges of Devourer territory. Chen's expression sharpened. What have they found? Initial contact occurred 6 hours ago. Lieutenant Colonel Shaw's group encountered a small Devourer patrol near the Rigel system. The results were interesting. Chen raised an eyebrow. Define interesting. Shaw's people hit the Devourers with a combination of conventional kinetic weapons and mining charges. The Devourers adapted to the energy signatures within minutes, just like the intelligence report suggested. But they never adapted to the mining charges. Why not? Because mining charges aren't weapons, Vasquez explained with a slight smile. They're tools. The Devourers' adaptation protocols are designed to counter weapons systems. They ignored the mining charges until it was too late. Silmara's form flickered rapidly. They defeated Devourers with mining equipment. Not defeated, Chen corrected. Damaged. But it's the first confirmed damage done to Devourer vessels in 3 months. And more importantly, it proved our theory about unconventional approaches. He turned to address the wider group of officers who had gathered. Pass the word to all units. The Devourers adapt to military threats, but they may not recognize civilian equipment as dangerous until it's too late. I want every unit to experiment with non-military tools and techniques. Sir, Wright interrupted, we're also getting reports from the psychological warfare specialists. Chen looked surprised. We have psychological warfare specialists. Former advertising executives, entertainment industry veterans, and social media specialists, Wright explained. They volunteered when they heard we might need to demoralize an enemy. How do you demoralize machines? You don't, Vasquez said with a grin. But you can confuse their pattern recognition systems. The advertising people have been developing what they call cognitive spam, information designed to overload adaptive algorithms. Chun found himself impressed once again by human ingenuity. Show me. The display shifted to show a recording from the reconnaissance mission. During the engagement, Shah's ships had broadcasted thousands of simultaneous signals across every frequency and medium. Radio transmissions, laser communications, quantum entanglement channels, even crude semaphore flag signals. The Devourers tried to analyze and adapt to every communication method simultaneously, Wright explained. Their processing systems became overloaded trying to determine which signals were genuine tactical communications and which were deception. It only worked for about 10 minutes, Vasquez admitted. But 10 minutes of confusion in the middle of a battle can be decisive. Chun studied the tactical reports with growing satisfaction. This was exactly what he had hoped for when he proposed using veterans rather than active military personnel. Active soldiers would have followed doctrine, used approved weapons, and engaged in predictable patterns. Veterans brought creativity born from experience and a willingness to try anything that might work. Ambassador Silmara, he said, turning back to the crystalline representative. You can report to the Council that human forces are ready to begin operations against the Devourers. How can you be certain? She asked. You've only conducted limited testing. Because, Chen replied, we've learned something important. The Devourers are machines, which means they're bound by programming and logic. They adapt to threats they recognize, but they have trouble with situations that don't fit their parameters. He gestured toward the massive fleet taking shape around them. Every ship out there represents decades of human experience with improvisation, adaptation, and thinking outside established parameters. The Devourers have never faced an enemy that specializes in doing things wrong according to proper military doctrine. And if your unconventional approach fails, Chen's expression grew serious. Then, we'll try something else. And if that fails, we'll try something else again. That's what humans do, Ambassador. We keep trying new approaches until something works. As if to emphasize his point, an alarm chimed, and a new report appeared on the display. Another reconnaissance group had made contact with Devourers this time using a tactic developed by former Carnival workers who had somehow gotten hold of military-grade hologram generators. They convinced the Devourers they were fighting a fleet of battleships, Wright reported with barely contained amusement. The Devourers spent 40 minutes trying to adapt to weapons that didn't exist while the actual human ships hit them with conventional missiles. Silmara's form cycled through several color combinations that didn't translate to any recognizable emotion. "Your species," she said finally, "is going to be either the salvation of the galaxy or the cause of its complete confusion." "Probably both," Chen admitted with a smile. "But right now, I'll take confused Devourers over dead civilizations." The Devourer battle group hung in space like a collection of malevolent stars, their dark hulls absorbing all light that touched them. Each ship was roughly the size of a city, their surfaces covered with the characteristic hexagonal patterns that mark Devourer construction. Intelligence reports indicated this particular group had consumed 17 worlds in the past month, adding their technological and biological distinctiveness to an already overwhelming arsenal. Commander Elena Rodriguez watched the enemy formation through the sensors of her converted freight hauler, the Lucky Strike. Around her, a motley collection of 43 vessels waited in the shadow of a dead moon, their crews making final preparations for what would either be humanity's first major victory against the Devourers or a spectacular demonstration of their ability to die creatively. "All units, this is Lucky Strike," Rodriguez transmitted on the encrypted channel. "Enemy formation is exactly where our reconnaissance predicted. 7 heavy battleships, 14 medium cruisers, and at least 30 smaller vessels. They're arranged in classic Devourer Pattern 7, which means they're expecting conventional fleet tactics." "Copy that." Lucky Strike came to reply from Captain Johann Newman aboard the Sly Fox, a former luxury yacht now bristling with weapons that technically violated several galactic treaties. "My people are reading massive energy signatures from their adaptive shielding. They're definitely ready for energy weapons." "Good thing we're not planning to use energy weapons," Rodriguez replied with grim satisfaction. Her crew consisted of veterans from the Tau Ceti mining conflicts, people who had spent decades extracting resources from hostile environments while fighting off corporate raiders and claim jumpers. To them, the Devourer ships looked less like unstoppable weapons of destruction and more like particularly challenging or deposits. "Engineering, what's the status on our special cargo?" Rodriguez asked. "Ready to deploy, Commander," replied Chief Engineer Marcus Santos, a grizzled veteran whose cybernetic arm was a souvenir from the asteroid belt wars. "We've got 200 tons of metallic hydrogen packed into mining charges, plus another 50 tons of antimatter catalyst wrapped in civilian shipping containers. The Devourers shouldn't recognize any of it as weapons until we're already inside their perimeter." Rodriguez nodded. The plan was audaciously simple. Approach the Devourer fleet disguised as refugee ships seeking sanctuary. Get close enough to deploy their unconventional weapons. Then, retreat while other units hit the confused enemy from unexpected angles. "All ships begin Phase 1, she ordered. Across the scattered human fleet, 43 vessels began broadcasting distress signals and powering down their weapons. To external sensors, they would appear to be civilian ships fleeing the Devourer advance. The energy signatures were all wrong for military vessels. The formation was chaotic, and the ships themselves looked more like a refugee convoy than a strike force. The Devourers responded exactly as predicted. The massive alien vessels began moving to intercept the apparent refugees, their formations shifting to surround and contain the smaller ships. Their adaptive shielding remained configured for anti-fleet operations, and their weapons stayed powered down to avoid unnecessarily damaging potential resources. "They're buying it," reported sensor specialist Linda Chong. "Devourer ships are moving to intercept. They're treating us as a refugee convoy. Distance to engagement range, 30,000 kilometers, and closing. They'll have us surrounded in 6 minutes." Rodriguez allowed herself a tight smile. The Devourer's predictability was both their greatest strength and their most exploitable weakness. Every galactic military had tried to outfight them using superior technology and tactics. None had tried to simply lie to them. "All units, prepare for Phase 2, she transmitted. "Remember, we need to be inside their formation when we spring the surprise." The next few minutes passed in tense silence as the human ships allowed themselves to be herded into the center of the Devourer formation. The alien vessels loomed around them like metal mountains, their dark hulls crackling with energy as they prepared to begin the harvesting process. "Commander," Chang reported, "they're beginning active scans. They'll detect our true nature within minutes." "Then, it's time to stop pretending," Rodriguez replied. "All units, execute Phase 2. Show them what human veterans do when someone threatens their families." The change was instantaneous and devastating. 43 ships that had appeared defenseless suddenly unleashed a barrage of weapons that no military doctrine in the galaxy had ever contemplated. Mining charges designed to crack asteroids detonated against Devourer hulls. Antimatter catalysts wrapped in civilian shipping containers turned into improvised bombs. Industrial cutting lasers meant for metal processing carved through alien armor. The Devourer's adaptive systems, programmed to counter military threats, found themselves completely unprepared for an attack using civilian equipment. Their shields, configured to deflect energy weapons, offered no protection against mining explosives. Their armor, designed to regenerate from weapon damage, couldn't adapt to tools that weren't supposed to be weapons. Direct hits on multiple targets. Chang shouted over the chaos of battle. "Their shields aren't adapting because they don't recognize mining charges as weapons," Santos added with savage satisfaction. "To their systems, we're just conducting particularly aggressive industrial operations." But the Devourers weren't helpless. Even as they struggled to adapt to the unconventional attack, they began returning fire with weapons that could vaporize asteroids. The difference was that unlike previous galactic fleets, the humans weren't trying to stand and fight. Phase 3. Rodriguez ordered. "All units, execute evasion pattern chaos." What followed would have horrified any traditional military commander. Instead of maintaining formation or following coordinated evasion patterns, each human ship began moving independently according to plans that made sense only to their specific crews. Former pirates used tactics learned from running blockades. Ex-military transport pilots employed asteroid belt navigation techniques. Even civilian captains contributed by flying their ships in patterns that civilian pilots would use to avoid space debris. The result was a three-dimensional ballet of chaos that the Devourer's tactical computers couldn't predict or counter. Every time they aimed at where logic suggested a ship should be, the target was somewhere else entirely, following movement patterns that violated every principle of proper space navigation. "Enemy formation is breaking apart," Chang reported. "They're trying to establish overlapping fields of fire, but our evasion patterns are preventing target locks." "Good," Rodriguez replied. "Maintain the chaos. Don't let them establish any kind of tactical rhythm." On her tactical display, she could see the larger picture of the battle developing exactly as planned. The human ships had punched holes in the Devourer formation, damaged several enemy vessels, and, most importantly, confused their adaptive systems enough to prevent immediate counteradaptation. "Lucky strike, this is Ghost Rider," came a transmission from Captain Sarah Kim's stealth corvette. "We're in position for Phase 4. Rodriguez checked her chronometer. The battle had been raging for 12 minutes, which was exactly how long their psychological warfare specialists had predicted the Devourers would need to begin adapting to their unconventional tactics. "All units, prepare for Phase 4, she transmitted. "Remember, the element of surprise only works once. After this, they'll know what we're capable of." Phase 4 was perhaps the most audacious part of the plan. While the main human force had been engaging the Devourers with improvised weapons and chaotic tactics, a second group of ships had been approaching from a completely different direction, moving slowly and quietly to avoid detection. This second force consisted entirely of former special operations personnel and their civilian counterparts, people who had spent their careers getting into places they weren't supposed to be and doing things that weren't supposed to be possible. "Ghost Rider to all stealth units," Kim transmitted. "Target the command ships. Use the confusion to get close, then hit them with everything we've got." The stealth ships had been invisible not because of advanced technology, but because of advanced deception. They were disguised as space debris, their heat signatures masked, their movements calculated to mimic the natural drift of asteroid fragments. When they struck, it was with weapons even more unconventional than the main force had used. electromagnetic pulse devices built from components designed for industrial equipment failure, computer viruses hidden in what appeared to be standard communication attempts, even old-fashioned explosive charges that had been jury-rigged to penetrate Devourer hulls through maintenance access points that shouldn't have existed. Direct hit on the lead command ship, Kim reported. Their command and control systems are showing massive disruption. The effect on the Devourer fleet was immediate and catastrophic. Without central coordination, individual ships began operating according to their own tactical algorithms, which often conflicted with each other. Some vessels tried to pursue the human ships, while others attempted to maintain formation. A few even began firing on empty space where their damaged sensors suggested targets might be. Rodriguez watched in satisfaction as the enemy formation dissolved into chaos. All units, Phase 5. Let's get out of here before they figure out how to counter what we just did to them. The withdrawal was as chaotic as everything else the humans had done, but chaos was precisely what made it effective. Instead of retreating in formation, each ship departed according to its own crew's expertise. Some used micro-jumps to short-range hyperspace coordinates. Others simply accelerated to maximum speed and relied on evasive maneuvering. A few even hid among the debris of the battle, playing dead until the Devourers moved on. 27 minutes after the battle began, the human fleet had scattered across dozens of light years, leaving behind a Devourer formation that had suffered more damage than any enemy force in recent memory. 3 Devourer ships had been destroyed outright, 7 more were severely damaged, and, most importantly, their adaptive systems were still trying to process what had just happened. Lucky strike to all units, Rodriguez transmitted once they had reached the rendezvous point. Mission successful. All ships report in. One by one, the responses came back. 38 ships had made it out intact. 4 had been damaged, but were still operational. Only 1 ship had been lost, the Brave Fool, whose crew had stayed behind to ensure the final phase of the operation succeeded. Total casualties, 43 personnel, reported Chief Medical Officer Dr. James Foster. That's a casualty rate of less than 2%. Rodriguez felt the weight of those losses, as she knew every other commander did. But she also knew what those numbers meant in the context of the war against the Devourers. Previous engagements had resulted in complete fleet losses. Today, humans had proved that the Devourers could be hurt, confused, and defeated. Transmit the battle recordings to General Chun, she ordered, and make sure the Galactic Council gets a copy. I think it's time they understood what human veterans can accomplish when we stop following the rules. As the Lucky Strike jumped to hyperspace, Rodriguez reflected on what they had just achieved. They hadn't just won a battle. They had fundamentally changed the nature of the war. The Devourers were no longer an unstoppable force of nature. They were just another enemy that could be outsmarted, outmaneuvered, and ultimately defeated by people who refused to accept that defeat was inevitable. And that, Rodriguez realized, was perhaps the most human thing of all. The absolute refusal to give up, even when everyone said the situation was hopeless. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened 12 hours after the Battle of Kepler, 786, though the massive crystalline chamber felt different this time. Gone were the undertones of despair and resignation that had characterized previous meetings. Instead, the air hummed with an electric tension that every species recognized as the sound of hope struggling to be born. Ambassador Bextera called the session to order, but her usually composed demeanor showed cracks of barely contained excitement. The holographic display above the assembly floor showed tactical recordings from the human engagement, replaying moments that had already been analyzed hundreds of times by military strategists across the galaxy. Fellow counselors, she began, her crystalline voice carrying harmonics of amazement. We have received confirmation of something unprecedented. The human veterans have engaged a full Devourer battle group and achieved a tactical victory with minimal losses. The chamber erupted not in celebration, but in stunned discussion. Representatives checked and rechecked their translation systems, certain they had misheard. The concept of a tactical victory against the Devourers had become so foreign that many species lacked proper words for it. Counselor Grexmore of the Stone Giants leaned forward, his massive form casting shadows across the speaking floor. Define tactical victory, Ambassador. Our records show that every previous engagement with Devourer forces has resulted in complete annihilation of the attacking force. The human force destroyed 3 Devourer vessels, severely damaged 7 others, disrupted their command and control systems, and withdrew with less than 2% casualties, ZYX3R replied. According to our military analysts, this represents the most successful engagement against Devourer forces in the recorded history of the current conflict. Representative Click-Tack's mandibles clicked rapidly in the insectoid equivalent of disbelief. Impossible. The Devourers adapt to all conventional weapons within minutes. Their defensive systems learn and counter any tactical approach, which is precisely why the human approach succeeded, came a new voice from the observation deck. General Chun had returned to address the council, but this time he was accompanied by several other humans whose presence commanded immediate attention. The battle-scarred veterans who flanked him carried themselves with the quiet confidence of people who had just accomplished the impossible. Counselors, Chun continued, I'd like you to meet Commander Elena Rodriguez, who led the operation, and Captain Sarah Kim, who commanded the stealth insertion team. Rodriguez stepped forward, her civilian clothes and modest bearing making her appear unremarkable compared to the exotic representatives surrounding her. But when she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who had just changed the course of galactic history. The Devourer's greatest strength is their ability to adapt to military threats, she said. So we didn't use military threats. We used mining equipment, civilian tools, and industrial processes. Their adaptive systems couldn't counter what they didn't recognize as weapons. The implications hit the assembly like a physical force. Military strategists from dozens of species had spent months trying to develop weapons powerful enough to overwhelm Devourer defenses. The humans had simply used tools that weren't weapons at all. Ambassador Fluxnaraz's containment suit flickered with agitated colors. You're suggesting that our technological superiority has been counterproductive? Not counterproductive, Captain Kim interjected. Just predictable. Every galactic military follows similar tactical doctrines because those doctrines are efficient and logical. The Devourers have learned to counter efficiency and logic. She gestured toward the tactical display, which now showed the chaotic movement patterns the human ships had used during their withdrawal. Look at our evasion patterns. No military academy in the galaxy would teach navigation like that because it's wasteful, inefficient, and dangerous. But it's also unpredictable, Rodriguez added. The Devourers couldn't target us effectively because we weren't moving in any pattern their computers could analyze and predict. Counselor Varithak of the Avian hierarchy ruffled his feathers in what translated as deep concern. Are you suggesting we abandon millennia of military evolution to adopt chaos? We're suggesting you expand your definition of tactics, General Chen replied. Human military doctrine has always emphasized adaptability over adherence to formal structure. We teach our people to think like soldiers, but also like engineers, miners, artists, criminals, and anything else that might be useful. He paused to let that sink in. Every human veteran has experience outside the military. They bring perspectives that purely military minds might miss. The display shifted to show personnel files for the human crews. Rodriguez had been a mining foreman before joining the military. Kim had worked in corporate security. Santos had been an industrial engineer. None of them fit the traditional mold of galactic military officers. Your diversity of experience creates tactical unpredictability, observed Representative Silmara, who had been studying the human approach for weeks. But how do you coordinate such disparate elements? We don't, Rodriguez replied simply. At least, not in the way you're thinking. Each unit operates independently, but we all share the same goal and the same intelligence. Coordination emerges naturally from shared purpose rather than imposed structure. The concept was radical enough to cause several representatives to request translation clarifications. The idea of military units operating without centralized command violated fundamental principles of galactic warfare. This approach might work for small engagements, Counselor Grexmore rumbled, but the Devourers control thousands of systems. How can such unconventional tactics scale to the level required? They don't scale, General Chen admitted. They multiply. The distinction was subtle but crucial. Rather than trying to create larger versions of their successful tactics, The humans were planning to replicate their approach across hundreds of independent operations. We're not building a single massive fleet, Chen explained. We're creating thousands of small autonomous units. Each one will develop its own approach to fighting the Devourers based on their crew's backgrounds and experience. Captain Kim activated a new display showing the current deployment of human forces. Instead of the concentrated fleets that characterize galactic military operations, human units were scattered across dozens of sectors in groups ranging from single ships to small squadrons. Former pirates are using hit-and-run tactics learned from raiding operations, she explained. Mining crews are treating Devourer ships like particularly stubborn asteroids. Transport pilots are using their knowledge of cargo handling to deploy unconventional weapons. Entertainment industry veterans are confusing enemy sensors with elaborate hoaxes. The diversity was staggering. As the display cycled through different human units, it became clear that each group was approaching the problem from a completely different angle, united only by their determination to find some way to hurt the Devourers. But surely the Devourers will eventually adapt to these unconventional approaches, protested Ambassador Fluxnara. Once they recognize the threat patterns, they can counter them. Probably, Rodriguez agreed. But by the time they adapt to mining charges, we'll be hitting them with agricultural equipment. When they counter agricultural equipment, we'll try construction tools. When they figure out construction tools, someone will come up with something completely different. The key, General Chen added, is that human creativity outpaces machine adaptation. We can invent new approaches faster than they can develop counters, especially when every unit is free to experiment with whatever ideas they think might work. Ambassador Vextera's crystalline form had been cycling through rapid color changes as she processed the implications. You're describing a fundamentally different approach to warfare. Rather than seeking overwhelming force, you're creating overwhelming uncertainty. Exactly, Chen confirmed. The Devourers are machines. They depend on patterns, predictions, and logical responses. Humans specialize in being illogical, unpredictable, and creative. The chamber fell silent as representatives contemplated the implications. What the humans were proposing wasn't just a new military strategy. It was a complete philosophical departure from how advanced civilizations conducted warfare. There's something else, Rodriguez added, consulting a datapad. Our intelligence specialists have been analyzing Devourer behavior patterns during the engagement. They think we might have discovered something important about how the Devourer's adaptive systems work. A new tactical display appeared, showing detailed sensor readings from a battle. The data was complex, but the implications were clear to anyone with military experience. The Devourers don't just adapt to individual threats, Captain Kim explained. They adapt to entire tactical paradigms. Once they encounter a specific approach, they develop counters that work against all variations of that approach. Which is why conventional military tactics have been so ineffective, Rodriguez continued. Every galactic military follows similar principles, so once the Devourers adapted to one approach, they were prepared for all of them. But human tactics don't follow any single paradigm, General Chen concluded. We don't have enough unified doctrine for the Devourers to adapt to. Every engagement teaches them how to counter one specific approach, but it doesn't prepare them for the completely different approach they'll face in the next battle. The implications were staggering. If the humans were correct, the Devourer's greatest strength, their ability to adapt to any threat, could be neutralized by ensuring they never face the same threat twice. Counselor Grexmore's voice carried a note of something that might have been respect. You're proposing to defeat a superior enemy through pure unpredictability. We're proposing to defeat them by being human, Chen replied. Unpredictability, creativity, stubbornness, and the refusal to accept that anything is impossible. Those aren't military tactics, they're human characteristics. Ambassador Vextera called for order as excited discussions broke out across the chamber. For the first time since the Devourer crisis began, the Galactic Council was debating not whether they would survive, but how they might win. General Chen, she said formally, the Galactic Council authorizes unlimited resource allocation to support human veteran operations against the Devourers. You have access to our shipyards, our technology, our intelligence networks, and anything else you require. Thank you, Ambassador, Chen replied. But What we need most isn't technology or resources. We need you to stay out of our way and let us fight this war the only way we know how. Which is? Chin's smile was grim but determined, like humans who refuse to lose. 6 months after the first human victory against the Devourers, the war had transformed into something no military strategist in galactic history could have predicted. The ordered advance of the machine swarm had dissolved into a chaotic patchwork of contested systems, disrupted supply lines, and increasingly erratic Devourer behavior patterns. General Marcus Chun stood in the Situation Room aboard the command station New Horizon, studying a holographic map that told the story of humanity's unconventional war. Red zones marked Devourer-controlled space, but those zones were now riddled with gaps, islands of contested territory, and question marks where intelligence reports conflicted with observed reality. Status report. Chun requested from his assembled staff. Colonel Martinez stepped forward, her expression mixing exhaustion with barely contained excitement. Sir, as of this morning, we have over 1,500 independent human units operating across 47 sectors. Total confirmed Devourer losses include 234 vessels destroyed, approximately 400 damaged, and an unknown number experiencing what our analysts are calling adaptive system confusion. Elaborate on that last point. Captain Wright pulled up a new display showing Devourer behavioral analysis. Sir, enemy units are beginning to exhibit contradictory response patterns. In the Vega sector, Devourer ships have been observed firing on empty space, apparently targeting threats that don't exist. In the Proxima system, they've been adapting their defenses to counter weapons that haven't been invented yet. Chun studied the data with growing satisfaction. This was exactly what he had hoped would happen when human veterans began their campaign of systematic unpredictability. They're over-adapting, explained Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the operations chief intelligence analyst. Devourer systems are designed to learn from each engagement and prepare for similar future threats. But when every engagement is completely different from the last one, their adaptive algorithms become increasingly unstable. Show me the Rigel incident, Chen ordered. The display shifted to show recordings from one of the war's more bizarre engagements. A human unit consisting primarily of former circus performers and entertainment industry veterans had somehow convinced a Devourer patrol that they were facing an invasion of giant space clowns armed with weaponized balloon animals. The Devourers spent 4 hours adapting their defenses to counter inflatable threats, Wright reported with barely contained amusement. Meanwhile, the actual human ships hit them with conventional missiles wrapped in birthday party decorations. Casualties? None on our side. 3 Devourer ships destroyed, 2 damaged. The enemy vessels were so focused on analyzing balloon-based threat profiles that they ignored the actual weapons until it was too late. Chen shook his head in amazement. Even by human standards, some of the tactics being employed defied rational explanation. But they worked, which was all that mattered. What about the larger strategic picture? He asked. Martinez activated a galaxy-wide tactical display. Sir, the Devourer advance has effectively stopped. They're no longer expanding their territory in any coordinated fashion. Individual units are still active, but they're operating defensively and showing signs of systematic confusion. The change was dramatic. 6 months ago, the Devourer swarm had been consuming entire star systems every few days. Now, they seemed unable to mount coordinated operations beyond the local level. Intelligence suggests their command and control systems are being overwhelmed by the need to process thousands of different tactical scenarios, Dr. Walsh explained. Every time a human unit tries something new, the entire Devourer network has to update its threat assessment protocols. And we're trying new things faster than they can process them, Wright added. Yesterday, a group of former food service workers defeated a Devourer patrol using kitchen equipment and cake decorating supplies. The day before, retired librarians used information warfare tactics based on overdue book notices. Chen found himself simultaneously proud and bewildered by his species' capacity for creative violence. The diversity of approaches being employed by human veterans had exceeded even his most optimistic projections. Sir, Martinez continued, we're also getting reports of Devourer units retreating from human space entirely. The Tau Ceti incident appears to have triggered some kind of threat reassessment protocol. Refresh my memory on Tau Cet. A group of former children's television producers convinced the Devourers they were facing an educational programming emergency, Wright explained. They broadcast 72 hours of continuous lessons about sharing, cooperation, and conflict resolution directly into Devourer communication networks. Chun stared at the report, certain he had misheard. They what? The Devourers' adaptive systems tried to counter what they perceived as an indoctrination attack, Dr. Walsh clarified. Their response protocols became locked in a loop, trying to develop immunity to educational content about friendship and teamwork. 3 Devourer vessels actually shut down completely rather than continue processing the contradictions. The remaining ships withdrew from the system and haven't returned, Martinez added. Intelligence believes they've classified human space as a cognitive hazard zone. Chin slumped in his chair, overwhelmed by the absurdity of what his people had accomplished. They had weaponized children's television programming and turned it into a strategic advantage against galaxy-consuming machines. General, came a new voice from the communication station. We're receiving a priority transmission from the Galactic Council. Put it through. Ambassador HFY's crystalline form materialized in the center of the Situation Room, her usual composure replaced by something that could only be described as bewildered admiration. General Chun, she said without preamble, the Galactic Council has completed its strategic assessment of the current military situation. And the Devourer threat has been effectively neutralized, she announced. Their expansion has ceased, their command structure has fragmented, and our intelligence indicates they're beginning to withdraw from contested systems. Chun felt a weight lifting from his shoulders that he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. Are you saying we've won? We're saying that human veterans have accomplished something that every military strategist in the galaxy considered impossible, HFY replied. You have defeated an enemy that had never been defeated through methods that had never been attempted. The Situation Room erupted in cheers and applause, but Chin found himself focused on the tactical displays, still showing scattered Devourer forces across multiple sectors. What about cleanup operations? He asked. That's why I'm contacting you directly, HFY said. The remaining Devourer forces are behaving strangely. Our analysts believe they may be attempting to establish communication protocols. Chin raised an eyebrow. Communication? With who? With you, General. With humans. It appears that your unconventional tactics have convinced the Devourers that humanity represents something they cannot understand or counter. Rather than continue fighting, they appear to be seeking some form of negotiated resolution. The implications were staggering. The galaxy-consuming machines that had terrified every spacefaring civilization were apparently asking for peace talks. What are their terms? Chin asked. They want to understand human unpredictability, HFY explained. Their message, translated through 17 different linguistic protocols, essentially asks, how do you make your minds work that way? Chin looked around the Situation Room at his staff of former soldiers, miners, engineers, and assorted misfits who had somehow saved galactic civilization by refusing to follow proper military doctrine. Tell them, he said finally, that unpredictability isn't something you learn. It's something you become when you've been through enough impossible situations that impossible stops meaning anything. Is that your official response to their communication attempt? Shun considered for a moment. No. Tell them that if they want to understand humans, they should start by studying the careers of circus performers, small-town mayors, and middle school teachers. Those people face truly impossible challenges every day and somehow make it work. HFY's form flickered through several color combinations that didn't translate to any recognizable emotion. General, I'm not certain our translation protocols can convey the full meaning of that response. Then, tell them this, Chin said with a slight smile. Tell them that humans don't fight to win. We fight because losing isn't acceptable. And when losing isn't acceptable, you find ways to make the impossible happen. And if they ask how to develop that capability themselves, Chin looked at the tactical display, showing the scattered remnants of what had once been an unstoppable force of destruction. Tell them they can start by learning to laugh at things that aren't funny, cry at things that aren't sad, and care about people they've never met. Tell them that when they can do all of that at the same time while operating heavy machinery under enemy fire, they'll begin to understand what makes humans unpredictable. As the communication ended and the celebration continued around him, Chun found himself reflecting on what they had accomplished. They hadn't just won a war. They had redefined what victory meant. They had taken their species' greatest weaknesses, their inability to follow orders, their tendency toward chaos, their refusal to accept logical limitations, and transformed them into their greatest strengths. "Sir," Martinez said, approaching with a final report, "we're getting confirmation from human units across all sectors. The Devourers are withdrawing. They're actually retreating from human space faster than they advanced into it. Any idea why?" Martinez smiled. "According to the intelligence intercepts, they've classified humanity as an incomprehensible tactical anomaly and decided that continued engagement represents an unacceptable risk to their operational stability." Chen laughed, a sound that carried relief, pride, and exhaustion in equal measure. "So we're so bad at following proper military doctrine that we've been declared a hazard to galactic security?" "Pretty much, sir." "Good," Chen said, looking out at the stars where human veterans were still conducting the most unconventional military campaign in galactic history. "That's probably the most human compliment we could ask for." As reports continued to arrive from across the galaxy, it became clear that the impossible had indeed happened. A species barely 2 centuries into space travel had defeated an enemy that had consumed civilizations for millennia, not through superior technology or brilliant strategy, but by being so fundamentally unpredictable that even machines designed to adapt to anything couldn't figure them out. The Galactic Council would spend decades studying human military methodology. Military academies would add courses on productive chaos theory and tactical unpredictability. Philosophers would debate whether humanity had won through genius or madness. But Chen knew the truth was simpler than any of that analysis would suggest. Humans had won because they were human, flawed, stubborn, creative, and absolutely incapable of giving up when something important was at stake. And in the end, that had been enough.